Hey guys, welcome back. So now that it's finally warming up a little bit, and I've moved and I've been able to explore, I found kind of another cozy, safe spot, quiet place, kind of by the river here. So it's not bad. I just gotta figure out somewhere to actually put my phone so that I don't have to hold it and speak at the same time. But let's get into a little bit more about this masked phenomenon, right? This phenomenon that's using these masks, these archetypes, to cloak itself, to hide itself, to adapt and manifest itself based on our own change, our own adaptability, right? So I want to discuss the level of consent that is also involved with it. So let's start there, because in order for something to adapt, there has to be an initial cause, and we are that cause, right? We are constantly changing the way we think, the way we see it, the way we perceive it. But could it also be inducing that change? So let's say on a linear timeline, even though that's probably not true the way timelines work, but on a linear timeline, we entered this matrix, right? We were the original cause of it, the original construction of it, right? In the Bible, it says Adam began to name the animals and the plants and the vegetation, I believe, or something, right? So she, Adam was more of a whole being at that point, right? It was a unified being. Was being used for its creative power, right? So the spirit was being used for its creative power. And interesting story that I'd never heard of, I think Navir, apparently is a Gnostic story. It was just discussed by the one guy. I watched his videos. I'm not a fan of his videos, but the guy with the blonde hair looks kind of like an angel. He was talking about this lost story, which somehow I'd missed it, but detailing what had really happened with the creation of Eve, right? It was actually Navir, or whatever her name is, I forgot. But she was the one that had given Adam spirit, which I heard that part, but I hadn't heard like the whole context of it. So, right, Adam was being used for his creative spirit to essentially name, label, which probably means manifest. To give something a name means to create it, right? You have now given it its energetic imprint. But because before, including Adam, they were kind of like golems, and this ties into the phenomenon I'll get into in a second. But they're like golems, they were lifeless, right? So they were just a mask. And a mask without the actor does not have life, does not have emotion behind it, right? So we can't relate to it, let's say, right, in the movie. So now that it's been animated, now that Adam has been animated with the spirit, these beings realized how much more powerful he is than him, which again could also be, these stories could be analogous to our own archetypes, or could be both literally happened in the astrals and continue to happen within ourselves, within our psyche, within our soul. Because in the story they differentiate between soul and spirit, right? The beings created of this earth had soul, right? Just like the movie Soul, they were the archetypes. But the spirit is the one animating them, even though the soul is tied to the anima or the animus. I think that's a misnomer. It should be the spirit that is tied to that, or rather, a miscorrelation. So these things were lifeless, and now that we, with our creative spirit, are giving them life, so now we've entered into the initial astral matrix, maybe through the fall of this Luciferic being, or Sophia, or whatever you want to call her, of the initial spirit somehow had entered here and created this corrupt world, right? And now it's animating it, it's giving it life. Now this phenomenon, it cannot create, but it can replicate, right? Which is why it constantly uses this incubi and succubi effect to replicate, right? It's replicating itself, I think, and whether that's in the method of just the ET races, what we consider ET, the demonic races, of angelic races, whatever, those archetypes, it's still replicating itself, because all these beings potentially are extensions of the body of the phenomenon, right? Of the demiurge, potentially. In my opinion, that's how I see it. They may not all be bad necessarily, but I think even our bodies are extensions of the demiurgic body. If we look at the way the brain and the spine are structured, it's very similar to how like the demiurge is portrayed, right? The lion's mane with the serpent body, same idea. The lion, the brain, mane, with the skeletal body, right? The skeletal nerve, or skeletal body, or the nervous system, actually, is what I'm thinking of. So still extensions of that archetype. So when it uses the succubi and incubi effect to replicate itself, right? When it's looking into the eyes of the, let's say, host or person that is trying to take from or replicate through, it essentially kind of does like a 3D printer copy, right? So I'm going to show you my face, or the face that you're comfortable with, that you relate to, the masks that you believe in. But at the moment of conception, and this is what Nathaniel Gillis talks about, then I hope to have him back on soon, because I want to discuss some other things, more theoretical ideas behind his research. At the moment of conception, it then changes into the actual form that it has, so that it wants to replicate, so that then the woman, which this is probably happening during the incubus effect, right? The woman then stares into the eyes of that being, that lifeless being, and then copies, right? Because the woman, the one that has the spirit, is the one actually able to create. Now, in the physical terms, the woman is the one that's actually able to manifest, right? It has the womb. She has the womb. But if we take that on a deeper spiritual level, they could also be using the spirit to do the same thing. So if you have the spirit and I don't, then I'm going to give you an image in your mind for you to then create, right? The same idea that they do with movies. They need you, with your creative power, to then say, okay, I agree with this. That's, I'm scared of this, which means I agree with this, which means I'm creating this, right? It has to necessitates a direct no for it to not be created, because that's how they attack you. They implant these images, these thoughts, right? Your brain is a receiver. You get these thoughts and you're like, where is this coming from? It's not me. And then you end up creating it for them, right? You give them a label, you give them an emotion, and the mask that they've given you, you've given it life, you've given it a role. So then, that begs the question of, are we really like on this movie set, right? That we're acting with all these masks, and just like the element of consent, did we actually accept this? And the show Severance really made me think about this, because it's like, okay, Mark goes into the corrupted, maniacal institution that they call Lumen, but he doesn't know what he's doing. Not only that, he had already been handled previously, because they, spoiler alert, took his wife and put her in the institution as well. So they already had a plan. Everything was kind of revolving around Mark and Gemma. Really, I didn't quite understand the plan yet, because they didn't fully reveal it. They probably will in season 3. But eventually Mark was supposed to finish this plan, which he did, called Cold Harbor, and then his wife would have been gone, would have been taken care of, and I don't know what was supposed to happen to Mark. But one of the scientists seemed to have been attracted to Gemma, or at least the original version of Gemma was supposed to be gone, right? Because what they had done was created 25 alter egos of her in that institution. And then they were testing for, get this, obedience and memory. So, okay, this new ego that has life, very similar to the Garden of Eden story, this new creation that has life, will it obey us? Will it remember where it comes from, right? So two of the most important things. They told her to do a task, she was doing it. It was actually a task from one of her very previous, most impactful memories, which involved taking apart baby's, bed, essentially, right? And she had no recollection of Mark doing that, right? So nothing was coming up for her. But then when Mark came, it's like she followed him, without knowing why, but she was called to follow him out of the room, and out of the room is where she was able to regain her memories, and all the alter egos faded, right, subsided. So I think that's the same idea that they're going for, that this phenomenon is going for. Fracture the spirit. It's not even possible, but I don't think it's possible. But like, turn it into a soul and then fracture that, if that makes sense. So give the spirit a mask, fracture that mask into other masks. Now the spirit has to go into each one. It's still the spirit, still probably whole, right? Still, in a sense, whole. Still has its same characteristics, but without the memory, without the connection to that conscious mind directly. Now you've created a subconscious and an unconscious, and these memories have been split, these personalities have been split. So you first need to get back to that original archetype that maybe has all the memories of the spirit, of where it's from, because that's what, that's when the state that Gemma wasn't in. She was fractured into 25 different personalities, and each one based on geolocation. She had a different one for that geolocation, right? For a different memory, I think. And then they were testing for obedience, right? Can we get this being to forget, and then can we make it obey us and create for us, right? But in the story, like I mentioned, that Garden of Eden story with Navera, she remembers she has power over them, and she remembers where she's actually from. So with those two things, you can't make her forget anymore. She remembers, and you can't make her obey, because she knows she has power. But so the being that you're trying to get to subjugate, now you can't anymore, because it's infinitely more power than you, or rather internally more power than these beings, right? So I think in these acts that this phenomena is doing, first creating religion, or first creating this boogeyman, or then creating all these other structures for people to fall in, and then first all these other masks, and then all the other structures for the masks to fall in. Oh, okay, you're this type, you're a logician. We've created these tasks for you to do because they pertain to your characteristics. Oh, you're very joyous and jovial. Oh, you could be a comedian, you could be working with kids, you could be a teacher, you could do this, you could be a manager. That's where numerology and astrology come to play. We've created all these meaningless tasks for you to do, because really what we're doing is just analyzing you and using you to actually create for us on the occult level, on the hidden level, right, of what we actually want to manifest in this world, so that we can just exercise total control, potentially, which then leads you to the digital theory, which we might all already be in one of these digital world simulations, right? Essentially, one of the rooms that Gemma is in Severance. And another, show that you might like is Electric Dreams, also found on Amazon, where they show this very idea where, they upload their mind, and then they can't figure out which reality is the true one, because they both seem real. Besides the fact, which you would catch on if you watch it, in the one that she uploads herself into, she can't recollect previous memories right away. They start coming back to her, but she's essentially stuck in this like coma-like state, right? Even like she turned into a guy essentially in the simulation, and he's suffering like these concussion-like symptoms. He had just suffered a concussion, and that's how they explain his lack of memory. Like, oh, don't worry about your memory. Just like that's why you can't remember anything. And it's again reminds us of this reality. Oh, like, yeah, well, we don't know really behind all this time what happened in history, but here's all this history, and they're kind of like implanted memories to make up for the fact they don't have memories of before, right? You just kind of came in and you're like, what's going on? Same concept, right? But when she goes back, she remembers all her life, right? But then it's like the simulation tries to convince her that that is the real reality. So, you know, cue atheism, cue nihilism. Like, this is all there is. Live your life. It doesn't matter. Just live. And, you know, from an experimental point of view, if someone was trying to see how you truly would act, that's what they would try to convince you of, that that's all there is, right? That there's nothing else. Be who you're supposed to be in this reality. And then makes for the perfect trap. Like, oh, well, you did all these mistakes. You gotta go back because, you know, you didn't have all the information, right? So how are we gonna make good decisions without previous information? It's kind of like you're inevitably going to make mistakes, right? Mistakes. And another interesting conspiracy, which this guy Alex Bale does on YouTube, if you want to look it up, it's about cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, that cereal Cocoa Puffs. And there's a bird, a cuckoo, who goes cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. He's essentially addicted. And he goes into how there's a conspiracy that the humans are actually running the bird city, which has been taken over by them through this Cocoa Puffs. Makes you think of like drugs, right? The bird is addicted to Cocoa Puffs, but then realizes that it needs to get itself away from these Cocoa Puffs because he realizes he's been a sleeper agent for the humans. Now all you have to do is replace bird society with human society, and humans with ETs or the phenomenon, which are using Cocoa Puffs or drugs or religion or various other things to subjugate the birds, the humans, and get them under control, right? So currently we have two societies potentially existing at the same time, the underground one and the above ground one, the surface level creatures. A phenomenon potentially running both in a sense, but one fighting to subjugate another without the other one's knowing, right? So I know it sounds silly based on just that you know, cereal, but look into it. Alex Bale is his name. Very interesting because he just came out with it. Very interesting. So that premise, like something is being used to give us this addiction to this material world, so that we think it's all there is, that we become addicted to it, we want more of it, and then we come back, and we come back, and we come back, and we keep being used, and we keep being used. Or it's all just some fun experiment that we initially consented to, and we love it, and we're just trying to have some sort of adventure, while everything is trying to manipulate us, right? So you can be the judge of that. I will continue doing this research to, you know, kind of get the most informed decision on this, but that's what I'm inclined to believe, that essentially we are being initiated, we are being used for our creative power to manifest what these beings can't, because it wants to play God, right? It wants to be God, but it can't be God because it doesn't have the creative power. So in order to be God, it has to assimilate itself into God and take that power to be God, essentially. That makes sense. So it's like a parasite. It needs to, if it can't itself be, then it will try to manipulate and puppeteer that being. And now it makes sense with all the introduction of what? The technology into humans, so that something, the AI or the phenomenon, whatever it is, can then use through that technology its ability to then puppeteer beings, right? Even though it already can, through the induction of thoughts, we still have our ability to become aware, right? Even though, we put on a mask and they give us a script and it says read these lines and act this way, we are still behind the mask and can say no, right? Because there's an element of consent. You can say no, I don't want to follow your script. Well, I'm gonna make my own movie, or I'm just not gonna act in this movie. I'm not gonna follow your script. So that element of consent, we've come full circle. They're trying to take away, potentially. So, once you hook yourself up to the digital, your element of consent kind of shoots out of the body. So that astral body, and you become like a spectator of your own life, right? Third person. You're watching third person of your own body acting the role. Which, can they still use our creative power then? Potentially. Can you some way fight to get it back? Potentially. Is it a lot harder than it would be if you're in your body, sort of in control, right? The higher self being in control of the ego, or rather, not necessarily in control, but completely aware and having the ability to not consent. It would be a lot easier, in my opinion, right? But I think the goal is to leave that all behind. Integrate it somehow, right? Just like Gemma needs to reintegrate her memories, go back to where she's from, realize that she doesn't consent to this. Because that's the purpose, really, of the integration of memories, is realizing that you don't have to consent. And then, go back to the origin point where all these rules and limitations don't apply anymore. Unless that's not something you want, right? Unless you like this. But in my opinion, it's played out. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like I said, I'll try and get another interview soon. We got some more things to discuss regarding kind of the initiatory aspect of this, which we've talked about on this channel before with Mr. Gillis. Because he's come to the same conclusions that I've come. Like it's a huge initiation. Looking at those numbers, every time you see those numbers, they're trying to initiate you. Something is trying to initiate you. Something is trying to guide you. Same phenomena with other methods as well. And I hope to get into that with him. So leave a like if you guys enjoyed. Subscribe. See you guys next time. Take care.